750 KTRS. A lot has been said about education and charter schools and school choice and all that. Coming up this Thursday, there is a symposium, if you will, at De La Salle Middle School. And our next guest is going to be there on the panel. His name is Michael McShane from the American Enterprise Institute. Michael, welcome to Big 550 KTRS here in St. Louis.
Oh, hey, thanks so much for having me.
You've written a paper called Why Catholic Schools Convert to Charters and What Happens Next. How many Catholic schools have converted to charters?
It depends sort of on how you define it. Our paper studied a group of 8 schools in Washington, D.C., 8 schools in Miami, and 2 schools in Indianapolis. But every year, about 1 or 2 schools around the country chooses to make that conversion or something like it.
All right, so to make that conversion, they have to give up their religious sort of philosophy?
Yep, exactly.
And in return, they get what?
They usually get more money, and they get public subsidies. So if you think about it, a Catholic school is a private school. People have to pay tuition, or parishes support it. Charter schools are supported by state dollars. So they're able to make it free for the students that attend because it's supplemented by state money.
Some people are looking at the radio and cannot believe that someone's actually advocating this. What are the benefits? One of the things schools like is their religious freedom to actually teach the Bible and teach it their way and go about things their own way. Why would they want to give that up?
No, that's exactly right. And in fact, we did some in-depth interviews with the people that were part of the process, and many of them feel that they've really lost something when they did this. The problem was that many of these schools were in unbelievably difficult financial straits and were looking at closing. So, in fact, the superintendent of Catholic schools in Washington, D.C. put it pretty well to me. He said, look, we weren't choosing between Catholic schools and charter schools. We were choosing between Catholic schools or charter schools or empty buildings. So with many of these schools were slated for closure because they didn't have the student base to stay open. So they decided to make this conversion to still be able to provide something for the students in their community, even if it couldn't be religious education.
And how were the charter schools? So all the same teachers, all the same principals, all that?
Yeah, generally speaking, most of the students stayed the same, most of the teachers stayed the same, most of the school leaders stayed the same. It varied a little bit from place to place, but generally speaking, it was sort of the same, the same group of folks.
And how did the schools do once they converted to a charter school?
Yeah, we saw a consistent pattern of declines in enrollment pre-switching. So every year, fewer and fewer students were able to attend there. After the switch, we saw huge gains in the number of students that were there, with even a couple years later, depending on the school, anywhere from 50 to 100 more students than they had before. Now, performance has been kind of all over the map. It's a little difficult to compare them because they're from states across the country that use different tests and such. But generally speaking, at least on the enrollment side, they saw huge increases after switching.
And when you say huge increases, you're also talking about more minority students too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I mean, if you think about it, the barrier to students attending these schools when they're Catholic schools is money. And insofar as poverty and minority status is correlated with one another, you'd expect when you remove the tuition barrier, more poor students, more minority students are able to access these schools. And so that's what we saw. We saw more minority students getting in, more low-income students getting in, more students, period, getting into these schools because they don't have to pay for them anymore.
Were the students who were already going to the Catholic schools, did they stay when they switched to a quote-unquote charter school?
Yeah, a large number of them stayed. A small number that were still interested in the religious education piece transferred to other Catholic schools within that given diocese. But a large number of those students, predominantly the schools that served African-American communities, a majority of those students were not, in fact, Catholic. They went to Catholic schools because they had high academic expectations. They had Christian religious instruction, so it was roughly, similar to what they believed. But they weren't necessarily there for the explicit Catholic education. So a lot of those students stayed. Those that were there and in places where schools had large Hispanic populations, which is a more generally Catholic population, many of those students decided to go to Catholic schools, other Catholic schools.
Your paper that you wrote, you said profiled 10 or so of these Catholic schools that switched to a charter school. But are there any numbers nationally how many Catholic schools are actually switching to charter schools?
Yeah, it's tough to say because in a lot of places, Catholic schools will close, and then a couple years later, the empty buildings will be rented out to charter schools, but it's not really the same students necessarily or the same faculty. I would guess the number that have done this so far around the country is probably between 20 and 30, with, again, maybe one or two every year choosing. And it's actually interesting. De La Salle in St. Louis is doing this. Next year, I believe, the plan is to reopen as a charter school.
Is that right?
Yes.
They are. I know a little bit about them. I've done some charity work for them, and as a Catholic school in the heart of a very bad neighborhood here in St. Louis, probably it was. To talk about a beacon of hope in a very troubled neighborhood. But they're going to give up their religious teachings and go charter school for the money.
Yeah, that's what it looks like so far. I mean, the problem is if you think about it. In many of these neighborhoods, when these Catholic schools were built, they were predominantly Catholic. They were educating immigrants, Italians, Irish, Polish folks. And those neighborhood demographics changed. So it changed two things. One were the students that attend the schools. They were less likely to be Catholic in many ways from more economically disadvantaged backgrounds. But two, it also changed the parish dynamic. So there are fewer people in these parishes. That means fewer ties, less money coming in to support the schools. So urban Catholic schools in these predominantly non-Catholic areas are in unbelievably difficult financial straits. And without some sort of infusion of outside dollars, it's almost impossible. It's really a matter of arithmetic for them to be able to keep the doors open. So without some kind of, now there are states across the country, 20-something that have either school voucher programs or what are called tuition tax credit programs that allow public dollars to flow into private schools. But Missouri is not one of those states.
Right.
So unfortunately, a lot of these schools are just really between a rock and a hard place.
And so I guess...
It's unfortunate because we know the years of evidence have shown us that particularly Catholic schools are unbelievably effective at educating low-income and minority students. And so closing them really is a shame.
Yeah, it's a really interesting conversation. I want to make sure people know you're coming to town. You're speaking Thursday at De La Salle Middle School. Where can people go to find more information, Michael, about the breakfast or the luncheon, and then this paper you wrote about?
You can go to the Show Me Institute website. They're the folks that are going to be hosting it. There's a big page for that. You could also just Google me, Michael McShane, American Enterprise Institute, and all that information will be up on AEI, my employer's website as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting thought, and it's very thought-provoking as well. Michael McShane, have a good, safe trip here into St. Louis. And don't forget to pick up a little Ted Drewes on your way out the door.
Oh, can't miss it.
You got it. Thank you, sir. ShowMeInstitute.org is the website to find out more, and edchoice.org. The paper is called Why Catholic Schools Convert to Charters and What Happens Next. Michael McShane, our guest. 7:50.